Wanted to start by thanking the Mom 2.0 community for hosting this event. It's really great to be partnering with you again. For the third time, Thinx has teamed up with Period, a global nonprofit working to eradicate period poverty and stigma, to release a new State of the Period survey. The State of the Period is the only publicly available survey that tracks teen period poverty across the US. And this year, we expanded the study to include menstruators of all ages and generations to learn more about how period poverty and stigma are impacting our communities. And we know that a lack of knowledge or body literacy can lead to shame and discomfort about menstruation, about how our bodies change over time. So today we're really excited to bring some of these key findings from the survey to this town hall format, because we know that shame-free education and discussion about how our bodies work can really help end embarrassment and fear. Throughout the conversation, we'll dig into findings from the survey and explore different ways that we can all promote body literacy in our own lives and our own communities. Stay tuned at the end to find out some ways that you can get involved in supporting Period's mission, because they do a lot of great work to provide access to period products across the country. To guide the discussion today, I'm so excited to introduce our guests. Karen Walren, the best-selling author of The Lightmaker's Manifesto, whose newest book, Radiant Rebellion, comes out October 17th. She's also a lawyer, leadership coach, and activist. Welcome, Karen. And she's joined by Dr. Saru Bala, a naturopathic doctor and educational content creator specializing in women's hormonal health. Dr. Bala is also a Thinx partner. Welcome, Dr. Bala. I will let you two take it away. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I am so excited to be here. I'm really honored to be here. Before we get started, though, I would like to invite folks to leave any questions that arise during our time together in the chat. I know this is going to be a really rich conversation, so we want to make sure that we address any questions that come up, and we'll try to do that toward the end of our time together. And as Sarah mentioned, I'm the author of a new book. It's called Radiant Rebellion, Reclaim Aging, Practice Joy, and Raise a Little Hell. And in writing the book about aging and about getting older, the topic of body literacy was really sort of inevitable. It's really stunning how little we seem to know about our changing bodies, whether it's in puberty or it's post-menopause. So that I was invited to be here today is really exciting for me, because while my book is geared toward adults, I was really excited to hear how the conversations around our bodies seems to be changing and evolving as the next generations are coming up. So, for example, one of the first statistics that I want to share with you from the State of Period results, they found that more than 3/4, 76% of teens have questions about their periods and want to have more open conversation about their menstrual cycle. And teens are becoming more comfortable about discussing periods with their parents. And a majority, 72%, agree that they're more comfortable than their parents' generation, which actually doesn't surprise me at all, because my mom didn't really talk that much about periods growing up. So Dr. Bala, I'd love to just start with asking you, do you feel like parents are prepared to talk about the first period with their kids? Because, like I said, I didn't talk that much about it with my parents. So what advice would you give? Are we prepared? What kinds of advice would you give for a parent that might not know how to start?
Yeah.
Take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think parents now might have more preparation than they may have in past generations, given the awareness around period health and health in general, especially from kind of a social media and the internet standpoint. Because, growing up, the internet was barely budding, at least for us. So the wealth of information and access to information that we all have now wasn't there. So I do think parents have easier, at least, access to find information if they're looking. But that's the key word, right? If they're looking, because the conversations are still a little bit on the taboo side. So do they know that this is a conversation that's important in an adolescent's life? I like to believe the ones who want to be prepared are trying to search for and trying to piece together information, but they may not have the whole picture and they may not know what's accurate. And they likely aren't sure what are the important pieces to touch on, to talk about with their kid, to teach their kids. So as far as the conversation has come, I do think it needs to be a little bit more streamlined. So the information's out there, but what do they talk about? How do they talk about this with their children? I think at least from what I'm seeing, a lot of parents do want to talk about it, but they're like, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to start this conversation. I don't know what to talk to my kids about. So I think it has come a long way, but there still needs to be a little bit more in the topic of the conversation.
I think it's so funny. My daughter is now, she's almost 20 years old, right? So it's been a while since my daughter and I talked about periods, but I remember, and I feel like this is probably true for most parents. When I first talked about my daughter, or talked about periods with my daughter, she was really young. She was like, I think maybe 5 or something. It was very, very young. And it was because we were out in public and I had to go to the public restroom, and she was so young that she needed to come into the stall with me, and she saw me bleeding and was sort of like, oh my gosh, what is happening, right? And so I certainly wasn't prepared to talk to her about it. I did, like, I sort of, oh, I'm not hurt, and I told her this is what your body does to prepare for a baby, just in case, right? And sort of that it's just trying to get soft and comfy for the baby, and then at the end of a month it goes, oh, there's no baby here, we don't need this, right? Like, I sort of put it into this sort of story for her. But I suspect, even though my daughter was so young, that a lot of parents, when the time comes to speak with their kid, it comes sooner than they think, right? Like it suddenly happens. So what are some of the biggest questions you think that teens are asking about their period now, that come up that we can be sort of prepared to answer?
Yeah. So what I often get questions about is, first of all, what is normal, right? Like, I think a lot of people just don't even know, is it okay how much I'm bleeding? Is my cycle normal? Are they coming on time? Are my symptoms normal? Is my pain okay? Am I bleeding too much? Am I supposed to have PMS symptoms? They just want to know what's happening in their bodies and to know if they need to bring it up to someone's awareness, right? I think, most teens feel when something is off, and they look to adults and authority figures in their lives to tell them that it's okay or not. And when their parents don't know, and when they only get a few minutes with their doctor, or maybe their doctor is telling them that these symptoms are normal and it's just part of having a period, which I do often hear, then they start to feel confused because they feel like something's off, but they're being told they're fine. And then they just stop listening to their bodies. So I think the biggest question that I find that not just teens, but everyone is asking is this normal? Is this okay? Is this supposed to be happening? And when should I worry? When should I get more help?
No, that's so good. That's really interesting. The idea that whatever they're feeling, I love that the idea that kids know their bodies, right? They know if something's off. It didn't even occur to me, really, that could be the case. And to be able to give them this sort of agency to go, yeah, that's great, but something is wrong. I think is probably one of the most powerful things we can do as parents. So I love that. Yeah. The other thing that I think that is really interesting about the study that came out that they did, the state of the period, is the concept of period poverty, which is a really interesting thing. And I will say, I only learned about period poverty probably maybe in the last 8 or 9 years. Like, it wasn't really something that I really thought of. And period.org defines it as inadequate access to menstrual products or menstrual health education as a result of financial constraints or negative sociocultural stigmas associated with menstruation. And the concept that I learned it in was when I was traveling in Africa, because there were a lot of kids in rural areas who didn't have access to period products and couldn't go to school. Like, they had to stay home, and so were unable to go to school. But the idea that it's also very, very prevalent here in America was something that was really, really new to me. And the state of period found that while most kids are finding free products in school bathrooms now, they're finding more than they did in 2021. A quarter of students, 25%, say they're unable to do schoolwork because of lack of access to period products. And 44% of teens report stress and embarrassment due to a lack of access to these period products. So, Dr. Bala, can you kind of help bring light to these findings, especially here in the United States? Like, why is having adequate access to period products so important for continued development and even self-esteem for kids?
Absolutely. So I feel like navigating life as a teen is already so hard. We have those fluctuating hormones that are new, we're getting used to. We have to figure out who we are, what kind of person we are, the hierarchy of society and school and our peers and just being a teen in this world. And when you don't have access to period products, you have to miss days of school, not just one. And at that age, you're missing a lot when you're missing even one day of school. And beyond the education aspect, school is such a huge social structure that's important for a developing teen. So according to the CDC, adolescents 12 to 17 years old, and this info is older, it's from 2019, so these stats may be even worse now post-COVID, were that 15% had a major depressive episode, 36% had persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, almost 9% attempted suicide. So these stats are huge, and this is just for the general population. So for someone who is now worried about their period, staying home every month for almost a whole week or maybe more, this can be a really big factor that affects their mental health, their social well-being. All of it is so intertwined, and it's things that you don't really think about, like, oh, your period feels separate, but it's really not, right? When you're sitting away from your social structure that you have, and sometimes that social structure for a lot of people is their safe space. And when you have to miss that for days or a couple weeks from every single month, it starts to become an issue.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned in preparing for this is that there are things that we can do, those of us who aren't in school and aren't teenagers, that can help, fight period poverty with teens. And some of them include donating to schools and shelters and local period product drives, so donating pads and tampons and that kind of thing. Also, go to your community and request supplies if your child's school bathroom or a nurse doesn't have them. And one of the things I thought about with this was, kids can be very young when they get their first period, right? They can be in 5th grade, they can be 9 or 10 years old. And like, who would even think about having period access in the bathroom? So maybe the school nurse needs to be able to have them there, which I think is really, really great. Absolutely. And then also empower your kids, right? Like, if you have a teenager who's attending school, discuss period poverty with them. Ask them, do you have access? If you go to the bathroom, do you see baskets of tampons and pads there that are available? And if not, what are some of the things you can do? Is there a way that they can have a drive, or they can start a drive, or they can just, say, let's buy some extra and make sure that they're located in the bathroom. So I love that sort of idea of we can all individually sort of help fight period poverty if we have the means to do so. So I'm going to open it up to our audience in a little bit. One of the things I want to say, just want to remind you, don't forget we've got the chat. So if any questions have been coming up from anything that we've been talking about, please put them in the chat. And while you do so, I'm going to invite the amazing Meredith Walker to turn on her camera and introduce us and share some thoughts that she's got.
Thank you so much, Karen. So I'm Meredith Walker, co-founder and executive director of Amy Poehler's Smart Girls. And thank you so much, Dr. Bala. I'd like to ask on behalf of our community, like, we know that teens today have so much access to information online, and they're finding stuff out and they're sharing it with their friends, and they're sharing it with their friends, and so on. And so there's information flying all around. How do we guide teens to discern what's credible information and what's not credible? And how do we help guide them to avoid spreading misinformation?
Yes, that is such a hard question to answer. And sorry, I wasn't sure if I was muted or not. And so it is also very nuanced, right? I'm grateful for all the information and the access to the information, but how do you know what to trust? There's a lot of conflicting info. I myself don't know everything that's being said or marketed. I haven't read every blog post. I haven't seen every reel, but when I get information about a product or an issue presented to me, I know how to look into the research behind the claims. I know how to look at a product and assess whether it's going to be effective for them based on their symptoms. I have that background and clinical expertise that I use to weigh in on these topics. So I think finding a licensed healthcare provider who is up to date on clinical information and research and also aligns with you is going to be really, really important. And I know, that's a big answer. And it is a nuanced topic for this day and age, right? Health information is as available to our fingertips as it's ever been. but is it accurate? So I think making sure you're getting advice from someone who knows your case personally is going to be really important. And if you are listening to someone on the internet, making sure they're a licensed provider with a degree in healthcare, clinical expertise. I do see a lot of influencers and people who are very well-intentioned, wanting to spread the word about how they fixed and healed themselves, but they don't have the background knowledge and education to safely speak about health information to other people. And so it can get kind of weird in this space. So just kind of taking things on the internet at face value and then finding someone that you trust, finding someone that you can safely ask your questions and actually get answers from is going to be so, so important there.
Thank you. And thank you. Thank you so much for popping on, Meredith. It's good to see you. So I'd like to shift to sort of the state of the period for adults. And I'm, of course, really interested in this. And when I was writing Radiant Rebellion, when I was writing my book, I tell a story of one time going to a doctor and asking sort of like, what's happening here with my body? Why can't I lose weight? Why, all of a sudden, I was probably in my 40s at the time. And what was interesting is the doctor was like, well, Karen, you're in your 40s. What do you expect? And that was sort of the end of the conversation. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I don't know if I can go to a doctor and ask a question like that. Maybe I will have to turn to the internet, maybe, Dr. Google, and figure out what it was. And it turns out, of course, if you push, you can get some of these answers, but not everybody pushes, right? And the state of the period research shows that this year, they actually doubled the number of participants and allowed them to gain insight to the experience of 1,000 adults who menstruate. And they learned that a majority of adults, 60%, report that stigma impacts the comfort with their bodies. And they're more likely than teens to have felt too ashamed or embarrassed to seek help when they have questions about their body. And I suspect part of it is that we think we're adults. Shouldn't we know this? And so wouldn't it be embarrassing for me to ask a question that may be too simple to answer, right? So Dr. Bala, what is your reaction to hearing this? How does this connect with your own personal experience about what you hear and or don't hear as a medical professional?
Yeah. So I see this often when I work with people. They tell me they go to their doctor and for several different issues, they might be dismissed as either, oh, it's normal when you have a period to feel this way, or there's nothing wrong. Or what I hear really often is they were told to lose weight and that's why they were having these issues. And so it's just very dismissive to hear this, especially when you go to someone that you're seeking answers from. To feel and know something is wrong in your body and then just to feel so helpless. Like, what can you do? You went to them because you didn't know what to do, but they're telling you basically, there's nothing wrong. Like, this is just normal. This is a part of it. And then I think also as a society, we're told that these things are just things that we deal with when we have a period. Suck it up. So then we feel like a burden, or we feel like we're complaining too much. We don't speak out. We don't seek help. We don't talk about it with other people. We're like, oh, I don't want to be, complaining that I have a period. I don't want to be complaining that I have pain. Like, everyone's dealing with it. I'm just not even going to bring it up. And then it goes undiagnosed, or things start to get worse, or, we're just too afraid to talk about it. We're too afraid to bring it up because we've been told not to. So I think that's the most that I see working this space. When people finally find me, they're like, I was told this was normal, but I feel like I just can't function anymore.
Right. Or I think also something might be amiss, but you have friends who deal with far more crippling diagnoses. So it's like, why should I even bring this up? Exactly. When I know people are dealing with things that are so much more difficult, right? That are so much harder.
Exactly.
So what are some of the things that do go undiagnosed or undiscussed due to shame or stigma? Like, what do you find are really stigmatized when it comes to menstrual health and knowing our bodies?
I think all of it, right? I often see endometriosis, PCOS, pain, heavy bleeding. All of these things are getting undiagnosed or misdiagnosed because of what we talked about earlier, that shame around, I'm just complaining. This is normal. I was told something's wrong. Someone else has it worse than me. I probably, this isn't an issue. I see thyroid issues being dismissed all the time because it's just too normalized, especially for women, to be tired and fatigued and exhausted, or to complain about their weight, or to feel cold all the time, or to be unhappy with their hair or their skin, to the point that we miss a lot of these complaints. We miss a lot of these symptoms and diagnoses because they're just being dismissed when they're brought up. Like, oh, you're a mom, like you're postpartum. Of course you're tired. Oh, well, of course your hair is falling out. You just had a baby. Oh, yeah, of course your periods are weird. You just had a baby. Or like, oh, you have kids. Like, of course, all of these things are happening. Or like, oh yeah, you have a period, right? Like all of these things are things we hear constantly, and they are just normalized. And I think just dismissed to the point that when is it an issue? When is it, quote unquote normal?
The big focus for Thinx is body literacy and actively learning about your body, what it does, why it does it, why we have so many gaps in our understanding about this. So what advice do you give? Like now we know, okay, we shouldn't be afraid to ask the questions, but we've also heard that sometimes we get dismissive answers. So what's your advice for people who are seeking to, one, learn more about our bodies, but two, also advocate for ourselves when we are speaking to medical professionals?
Right. And I think we talked about this earlier with Meredith's question about, finding a provider, finding someone you trust, finding someone who is going to answer those questions for you. So you know that you have a legitimate answer and a source for asking these questions. That's going to be huge. But also know your body, right? Track your periods, track your ovulation, know where you are in your cycle, know what's going on there as far as your bleeding, and understand and kind of be more in tune with your body. I think a lot of us have disconnected ourselves from our periods and our bodies because we might have had all these symptoms that we're told were normal. And then we just kind of have to dissociate because we're like, I don't feel normal. This doesn't feel right, but I'm being told it is. I'm just not going to think about it. So kind of connecting again with our bodies, with our periods. When do I ovulate? How am I ovulating every month? How heavy is my period? How much am I bleeding? How many tampons or pads or cups or whatever am I going through in a period? How often is my period happening? All of these little things give me so much information about where in the body you're having issues. And it also gives you insight into what's going on with yourself. So you not only can trust when you know something is off, because you're like, well, I used to get my periods, so clockwork every 30 days. Now they're every 25 days. There's something going on, or I'm not ovulating. And I know that because I'm tracking. Like you get so much autonomy in yourself and your body when you start tracking these things, when you get more in tune with them. So being able to advocate for yourself is going to start with knowing yourself and knowing your body. So if you're just kind of disconnected and you're like, well, I have no idea, what time I go to bed. I have no idea when my period comes. I don't know if I'm ovulating or not. It's going to be that much harder for your provider to even know that something is off, right? So the more you know your body, the more you can be more in tune with what is going on. So then you can tell a provider, hey, I am not noticing ovulation every month, or my periods are lasting for a really long time. I'm bleeding through this amount of tampons. I'm having all of these symptoms this many days before my period starts. I feel really moody. I have night sweats. I'm irritable, whatever it is. Then you have so much more information to give them so that they're not saying, oh, well, that's normal. Because you're like, no, it's not normal. Here's exactly what's going on.
I'm going to pause for a second because I really want to make sure that I understand this. It sounds to me like what you're saying. So check me if I'm not getting this right, but it's not even just the menstrual cycles, but also I'm noticing differences in my skin or my hair, or
right.
I'm not sleeping. Like it's sort of almost a holistic thing that you're talking about as well that might have an impact on our menstrual health. Is that right?
Absolutely. And vice versa, right? Our hormones are impacting everything, and everything is impacting our hormones. So our sleep and our stress and what we put into our body and all of these other pieces are affecting our periods. And so when we know a little bit more, and I'm not saying to be, like crazy about like, you have to track every little thing and like make it consume your life, but just have an idea of, what you eat on a regular basis. What does your diet look like? What is going on with your sleep? What time do you typically go to bed? How much sleep are you getting? How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? How often are you pooping? Like just kind of being a little bit more in tune to these day-to-day pieces of your health can give your provider so much more information and you to know when something is off.
Man, Dr. Bala, where have you been? I wish I'd had this conversation with you a long time ago. Okay, we're going to open it back up to an audience member, but I just wanted to pause again and say if any questions are coming up for you, don't forget, put it in the chat. We are watching them, and so we'll get to it for sure. I'd like to invite Dr. Marie Mansoure-Lahai to turn on her camera and join us. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Marie Mansoure-Lahai. I recently had a baby 4 months ago. So
Congratulations.
thank you. My question is more so postpartum related. And with having a baby recently, I'm kind of struggling with understanding what is normal for my body and what isn't. A lot of the resources online are confusing and contradictory. So when will I start feeling like myself again? And how do I know what's normal in terms of, my postpartum flow? Because I know I've had experiences where I would think I'm on my period, but I'm not, especially within those first couple of weeks. And also as it pertains to breastfeeding.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that question. That is a very common question, especially because everything is so different postpartum. And
Yeah.
so when it comes to our periods, I really want to know postpartum. If you're, first of all, if you're breastfeeding, things are going to be a little bit more on the irregular side. So what I typically tell my patients and people that I work with is, if you are completely done breastfeeding, you're not pumping at all, you're not breastfeeding even a little bit, and you still haven't had a period in 3 months after you discontinue breastfeeding, that's when we want to look into what's going on with your hormones, what's happening. Are you ovulating again? Where's your estrogen? Where's your progesterone? Did your prolactin go back down? All of those pieces. Also, as far as between postpartum and when that period comes, it can come at different times for everybody. Some people get theirs right around that 6 to 8 week mark, even if they are breastfeeding. Some people will breastfeed for 2.5 years and have not a single bit of spotting. So everyone's bodies are different. And it really just depends on, where you are in your journey, where you are with all the other pieces that were going on. Did you have a lot of period issues prior to conceiving and prior to pregnancy with your periods? For some people, they completely go away during pregnancy and postpartum. For some people, they never had issues and then they started having issues postpartum because now they may not be sleeping. They don't have the time to nourish their bodies in the same way. They don't have time to do some of the things, and they're not getting, or they're more stressed out, or et cetera. So many factors change in that time. So it's really important. Again, know your body, know what feels off, right? I think in that postpartum period, we are all like, this is new. I should be stressed. I should be tired. Like, my body's doing weird things. But if you feel like something's off, that's always just the first sign of, just get it checked out, right? It's never going to hurt to be careful. It's never going to hurt to bring something up to your provider and say, I just want to be sure that I'm okay, if you feel like something just doesn't feel right. So always trust you and your gut instinct and your body, because you know it better than anyone else is. And then from there, my general rule of thumb, period wise, is if you've completely stopped, haven't had a period in 3 months, let's get things checked out. But in between then, it's kind of anything's up for grabs.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for your question.
Yeah.
No
I
problem.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your well-detailed answer. I actually want, is there time for like a follow-up
Go ahead.
with irregular periods?
Sure, go ahead.
I guess you kind of answered it already by saying like it doesn't hurt to just check.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
kind of like,
Yeah.
the general rule of thumb.
Yeah. And periods are going to be irregular while you're breastfeeding. If they've started and you're like, there's no rhyme or reason for when I have a period, but you're still breastfeeding, that is totally normal. That does happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I love that. Thank you for your question. And one of the things that I love about that, like personally, I just learned a lot from that question as well. And I love the fact that who knew that everybody's sort of postpartum experience was going to just vary so widely. It makes sense, right? It makes sense that that would be the case. We're all individuals. And when I was writing my book, like one of the things that I did, because I'm not an expert on anything, right? Like it was about aging in all different aspects, and I'm not an expert on any of that. I just know what's happening with me so far. I decided to interview lots of people, right? And I interviewed people who were experts. I interviewed doctors and social workers and all kinds of people. But I also interviewed people who I thought were aging really, really well, right? And just asked them, like, what's been your experience? And, of course, their wisdom was, gratefully received. But the biggest aha for me was that some of the questions I had, just like you just said, right? This was the most common question. It's such a common question. Like, I never really understood that the questions I had could be common, right?
Yeah.
It could be like, I think I expected, oh, I've heard that happen, Karen, and here. But so many times it was, oh, yeah, that happens all the time, or that happened to me, or that kind of thing. And there's something about community, right? And being able to talk with other people who are either experts or going through the same thing that makes you just sort of exhale, that makes you sort of just relax. So the question I have for you, Dr. Bala, is as you're in your career as both a doctor and a content creator, right? Have you seen how the power of community can impact and maybe even reduce certain stigmas?
Yes, I mean, I see and work with a lot of people in like group events, webinars like this, classes, or even on social media who are like, wow, I had no idea this was a thing, or wow, I didn't realize so many other people are also struggling with this. And seeing people talk openly and share their issues and start and continue the conversations that we should all be having is just so amazing. And I love how many people are kind of waking up and wanting to have these conversations. I think it's been so shushed and pushed away for such a long time. And like seeing all of these people come in and talk about their periods and just talk more openly and share about it and open up these conversations that we're having now and wanting to be informed in their bodies and more connected to what's going on. It's really great, and it's empowering to see it and also get to be a part of it. I have some longtime followers who will often comment back to other people who are like, I had no idea. And like I didn't know this was not normal, or I didn't know this was something that I was experiencing that other people are. And they'll be like, yeah, I didn't either, until I found out about this, or I tried this. And it's just really beautiful to see other people supporting each other in that way, spreading the word about these topics and really starting to feel more autonomy in their health. Because I think until recently, people felt very helpless in their health. They had issues with their body or their periods or whatever, and they were like, I have to go see my doctor to get an answer. Whereas now I think because we're talking about things more, because there is so much information available, people feel like they are able to understand their body better. They're able to know their periods and their hormones and just get an idea of what is happening. And I just love the community that the period space has created. And I mean, this is just one example. And I think it's really beautiful to be able to be part of it and see how much community people need. Because I think within our own, personal communities, you might not have friends, you might not have neighbors, you might not have people who are talking about this with you. And to have that in a social space, I think is really great.
Well, first of all, I think the phrase period space is going to be possibly one of my favorite phrases from going forward. Like, who would have thought we would have ever said those words? But I totally agree. And I love the fact that, I'm a content creator myself. I'm an author as well. So community and connection is really, really huge to me. But I love the fact that there are organizations like Period and companies like Thinx that are making this a priority, of making the sort of research a priority and figuring out ways like this in order to sort of disseminate some of that research out there so that we can encourage that kind of community. So I love that. Yeah. Okay, we're going to open up again to the audience. We're going to invite Kanika Chatagupta. Hey, Kanika, how are you? Before Kanika, you get to your question, don't forget, if you've got any questions, please put it in the chat because we're going to be coming to you very, very soon. Kanika, why don't you introduce yourself and tell me your thoughts and questions?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Dr. Bala. This conversation has been so illuminating. Thank you to Mom Too and Thinx for coordinating this town hall. I feel like it's the health class that we all need. I'm Kanika Chatagupta. I'm a mom of 3, including twins. I had my 3 within a span of 18 months. So they're Irish triplets, if you will.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm also a television journalist and the host of a podcast called That's Total Mom Sense. And I truly believe in that gut instinct you spoke about, Dr. Bala. It's our mom sense. It's that intuition that we just have to trust. So my question is about perimenopause. And before I get into it, my friends and I talk about aging a lot. And, we want to age gracefully. And I actually had listened to a podcast episode. It was Julia Louis-Dreyfus's show, Wiser Than Me, where Diane von Furstenberg said, we need to change the narrative around aging. And instead of asking, how old are you? Let's try asking, how long have you lived? Oh. And I feel like that has just helped me reframe and embrace the process. And I recently watched Oprah's The Menopause Talk alongside Drew Barrymore and Maria Shriver, and I took notes. I am 41 years old, and I just want to feel prepared and educated when it comes to perimenopause, because I know it can happen anytime during this phase. And so on behalf of my community of moms who are in their 30s and 40s, we just want to know what to expect. So could you shed light on the signs to look for during perimenopause? And could you also share resources that are available to us?
With perimenopause, and I'm going to say that this is something that I say to everyone, whatever phase of life they're in, is that a lot of those negative symptoms that, again, we hear about that are stigmatized, that are kind of stereotyped, especially in that perimenopause, menopausal transition, right? Of hot flashes and night sweats and feeling really irritable and moody and freezing everyone out and turning down the like all of these things are not necessarily something you have to be that are on the forefront of your trajectory, right? There are a lot of things that we can do when we support our body, when we support our liver, when we support our gut, when we support our hormonal metabolism, to be able to mitigate and really minimize those symptoms and not experience this awful transition. Like, I think a lot of us fear aging, a lot of us fear menopause because we think that it has to be this horrible transition. And again, when we know our body, when we know what's going on with our cycles, we know where there's an issue in our body, we know when we can troubleshoot, where we can troubleshoot, how we can troubleshoot. So again, knowing your body, what is normal for you as far as your periods, because as you transition into menopause, you are going to notice like your periods might start getting irregular. But if you haven't been tracking that, how do you know? Because if you don't know when the last time you had a period was, you might not know that it's getting irregular. You might not notice that your flow is slowing down. You might not notice that you're starting to creep up with some night sweats or hot flashes. You're like, I just feel a little bit hotter than usual, but it only lasted for a day or two and you didn't really pay attention to it, right? So again, knowing when these things are happening in your body, knowing your cycles will help you for when you are getting into that transition period, like, oh, is this it? Is this happening? Like, things are starting to slow down. I noticed like the past few cycles have been much longer than they usually are. I'm bleeding way less, or et cetera, et cetera. So again, that's going to be a really great one. As far as resources, I would say, again, it's tricky to have research. I think books are a really great way because we know books, when they're published, the research is there. We've done a lot and Karen, I'm sure you can talk about that too, as you have written about this. There's a lot of research that goes into it. So I think books are a really great way. Social media can be hit or miss, especially when you're, finding certain people that are talking about things very emphatically. You may think like, oh my God, this is it. This is the cure for everything. But again, finding a provider too, that you really trust, that you can ask these questions to your particular body, right? Because we can say things generally on social media, but knowing what's going on with you is really important. So I very, very, very much always advocate for somebody finding a provider they really jive with, that they trust, that they feel safe with, that they can ask questions and feel like they're getting those answers from. So that's really important as well. And I would say whatever books really resonate with you, start there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I just ask a question before we open it up to everybody? How often should we be going to our doctors and seek and sort of keeping a tab on that? We haven't really discussed that. How should we be going every year, every other year? Like what's sort of a good cadence for us to be taking care of ourselves?
Yeah, that's great. I personally like to see people as a maintenance, like twice a year, every 6 months.
Oh, really?
As
wow.
Just because a lot of things do change, right? I get a lot of people where I work with them very closely for a few months and then I don't see them again for 6 months to a year. And they're like, I have a new set of problems now. And so then we kind of, start over again. So I like to just, as a maintenance, see people every 6 months and just say, how are you doing? Or do you have any questions? Have things changed with your body, with your health, with your period, with your stress, with your PMS, like anything? And so I know different providers do things different ways and different people feel comfortable with different things. I say at least once a year, if
Okay.
not twice a year for people. Anything less than that, I think you might miss something. So at the very least, at least once a year, you should, get your annual, check in with your provider, make sure that you're able to ask questions, right? Because I feel like I always have questions of, it's like, I'm always texting my other healthcare provider friends and being like, is this normal? Like, this just happened to me. Because there's so much even in my toolbox that I don't have. So really being able to consult with somebody that you trust and feel a good relationship with, so that okay, things are good. Like, I feel okay. And I know that everything is looking okay as well.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, the moment has come. We're going to go look into the questions. I'm going to invite Sarah Safonic to come on. I know you've been monitoring what's been going on in our chat. Are there any great questions that have come up that we should tackle?
Yeah, so we've had some really great questions come in, and I'm just going to jump right into it. Someone asked, mental health and knowing one's mind, spirit, and connection with one's cycle, being holistically in tune with yourself and understanding what's normal. Is that, something that you can advise on as an important thing of kind of knowing your cycle that way?
Sorry, repeat the first part of that question again.
Sure, I'll read it back. So talking about mental health and knowing like your mind and spirit connection with your cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of us experience that PMS, right, in that second half of our cycles, and we really get that irritability, we get that anxiety, we get that depression, we're not sleeping as well. And so kind of feeling, where are you on a daily basis? The reason that those symptoms pop up more in that luteal phase is because of that shift in our hormones, just make it more prevalent. Those things are kind of always in the background, but in our follicular phase, that estrogen is there to make us feel like, like we're a superhero. We feel amazing. We feel really good and clear. Our skin looks great and we have so much energy. And then we ovulate and things kind of go downhill when that mental health, background is kind of already there. So focusing on that on a regular basis is going to be a huge part of what I work on with people for their PMS. And once we can regulate that nervous system, once we can deal with that stress, your PMS symptoms start to disappear. So it's not something that is unrelated. I think that is absolutely something that we need to kind of correlate together and make sure that working on our mental health also helps with those PMS symptoms, also helps with our hormones.
Can I just add something to that? I think I love that. And I think certainly one of the things that I have learned and just researching for my books as well is sort of having a cadence of checking in with yourself, right? Checking in with the spiritual, the physical, the intellectual, even your relationships, right? And it's not something like, I think a lot of us would think like, oh my gosh, if I were to meditate and work out and do and breathe and do all there's not enough time in the day, but sort of just having sort of even a daily cadence of checking, how did I do that? Right? Did I check in with myself today? And being able to see sort of a trend over time, like, oh, I've really been ignoring over time my spiritual health, or I've been really over time my emotional health. That is such a really, really great way to kind of figure out where things are going and have this sort of data in order to take to somebody like Dr. Bala when you go talk to them. So I wanted just to add that in there. I think having a cadence of actually, I'm a big journaler, like going in and checking those things on a daily basis. Not that you take care of it every day, but that you see how you're taking care of it over time.
Yep. I totally agree. I love journaling and I love, just the self-awareness, right? I think a lot of us don't realize how stressed we are until someone stops and asks you and you're like, whoa, I did not realize how stressed I am.
Absolutely.
We just had another question come in right now that I'm going to read. It says, I recently read that the AAP said that race is made up of construct, especially as it's related to earlier puberty in minority communities. And she says she's writing a book and wondering about your perspective on race and periods.
That is an interesting question. I definitely would say it impacts, like even with the period poverty stuff that we talked about earlier today, that's a huge factor. And we do often see that across certain socioeconomic backgrounds and certain races. And so that does play a role in, as it's affecting your overall health, your mental health. And so I don't know that it's something that's not affecting all of this. Again, I haven't dove too far into the research and I would love to know more about what your findings have been on that. But I would definitely say race does play a big factor. Socioeconomics do play a factor in specifically like in that earlier period time, like when you are a teen, when you are in school, if you do struggle with period poverty and you're having to miss school, as we've talked about, I think that absolutely can play a huge role in our lives.
And something kind of related to that, the stats around period poverty and access to products are important. My coworkers are almost all male, but she'd love to ask for menstrual products in the bathroom. Do you have any advice on doing that?
I would say say that these are your needs and just really bring it. And it might not, if you're in an all male environment, it might not even be on the forefront of their mind. So just asking for it is something I think a lot of people haven't done because they're like, well, I don't think it'll be well received. But I feel like if you're going to get pushback from that, that's a whole different topic to talk about. But hopefully you're able to just ask them and let them know, bring it to their attention that this is something that is a need of yours.
Yeah. I'll just add to that. A lot of it sort of depends on the size of your company, but if your company is one that is large enough to have an HR department, I think that's also a really great place to go. If it feels weird to ask like your male coworkers, like maybe going at least to HR, that might help. The other thing is if it's a small enough company, bring it in there, right? And then like for me, I would be like maybe bring some products into the bathroom and then say, hey, we're running low. Can we get some, can we have this handled or something like that? Sort of like almost ask permission. I mean, ask forgiveness before permission kind of thing. Like just sort of start it and then see how you can get your company to sponsor it. And that way might be another way to do that.
Totally.
I say that as an ex-lawyer, right? Like, I mean, I think if you get any pushback where it's like, well, that's just woman stuff. Like Dr. Bala said, that's a whole other conversation that you need to be having. So definitely push for it.
Yeah.
And then someone's looking for your biggest tips for self-advocacy when it comes to doctor's appointments. So they feel like sometimes their symptoms are dismissed. And how can they navigate that so that their provider is listening?
I think, well, for one, and this is hard to say it because it's hard to just find a provider, and bouncing around is already hard. But if you feel like you go to your provider and you just feel dismissed, that probably isn't a provider that is going to make you feel safe in the first place. So that's already an issue there. Another thing I would say is, again, knowing and tracking your cycle. So you have this objective data to bring to them and say, well, I used to have, this long of a cycle. Now it's this long, or I'm bleeding for this much. I'm having this many tampons worth of blood every month. I'm having XYZ symptoms on these days of my cycle. And this is when I experience them. Having more knowledge and insight into your body and being able to kind of objectively say, these are the exact symptoms I'm experiencing and when will kind of give them more insight into being like, oh, okay, maybe I do need to look into this, which they should be doing that anyway if you're bringing it up, and they should probably be asking you these questions. But I know that's not the case. A lot of doctors just don't have that time with you. I mean, how often do you spend more than 10 minutes with your doctor and being able to answer all of the questions you have and also getting answers is not, it's just not in the cards sometimes. And so that can be already an obstacle there. But the more information you have that you can provide them objectively, the better you're gonna be able to see, okay, I can get labs in at this time, or I know like when this is off at this point of the cycle, it means XYZ. So
great. So I'm going to switch gears real quick. We have this question that says, my 10-year-old daughter just got her period for the first time, and she's the first in her class and feeling a lot of embarrassment over it. How do I help her?
Oh, I know I'm going to have to tackle that at some point in the near future with my daughter too. And I think, just sharing that it's a normal part of life, like they're also going to have that in the next like year or two is also an important aspect to shed light on. Cause I think when it's happening to you and no one else, you think something's wrong with you. You think you're different when really it's something that happens to 50% of us. And we all, half of us in the world get a period, and explaining that and just sharing that it's this, again, I think, the way a lot of us have grown up is that your period is this thing that sucks. We don't want to have it. It's this miserable thing. We're cursed with this. And instead kind of flipping that script and being like, look at this. You get so much more information about your body now. I know, on a daily and weekly basis, what's going on with my hormones. My husband doesn't have that superpower. He has no idea what's going on with his hormones in his body until he gets his labs done. Meanwhile, I know where I am in my cycle. I know what's going on with my hormones. I know if my estrogen and progesterone levels are in a healthy ratio based on how much I bleed it when I ovulate and how long my luteal phase is. So I think being able, and I know that's a lot for a 10-year-old, but maybe just being able to flip the script and saying, look at how much insight you can get into your body. Look at what this means. It means now, when you're ready to have a baby, your body's capable of that. And look at all this information that it's sharing with you, and really getting them kind of involved in their bodies. I think just turning it around, instead of it being this weird thing, this different thing, this thing that we now have to deal with, it's this thing that we now get to do.
And I think we just have one more question. After having my first baby, my body feels like it's completely changed. Do you have any tips for reconnecting with yourself after such a big change?
I feel that I am kind of in the same boat. I've bought like 10 different pairs of jeans over the past year because I'm like, what size am I? I don't know. I think, and this is what helped me personally, was just like seeing my daughter, seeing like, look at this well-fed child. Yes, my boobs might be down to the floor, but they fed her for so long. And yes, I might be up and down in jean sizes, but also I made a human life. And so giving your body that grace. And I feel like a lot of times in our society, we're just like, oh, pre-pregnancy. That's a huge thing that we all hear about. We talk about, I'm not at my pre-pregnancy weight. I don't have my pre-pregnancy body. Your pre-pregnancy life was a different chapter of your life. And this new, you get to be a mom now, and things are very different. So I think mindset is a huge piece there, but also what are the things that you're struggling with, right? There are a lot of hormonal aspects that change, and there are things that might be off that we may be able to troubleshoot. So what's going on with your periods? How heavy are you bleeding? Are you bleeding heavy? Do you have pain? Do you have PMS symptoms? Where is your sleep? Where is your nervous system now that you have a kid? Do you feel more on edge? Do you feel more alert? Do you have more anxiety because you now have this other person to worry about? There's a lot of things that change. And so then kind of figuring out, how can we troubleshoot that? How can I check in with myself, like Karen was saying earlier, with my mental health and my spiritual health, and where am I? Have I done any self-care practices? Have I done things to feel a little bit more grounded? So there's so many aspects. There are hormonal aspects too that we maybe need to check in on. I think most of us get one appointment postpartum at that 6-week visit to clear us for sexual activity, but we don't actually get checked in on, how are you doing? What's going on with you? How do you feel? Do you feel ready to have sex emotionally? A lot of us at 6 weeks probably don't, and that's not something that's asked about. So finding someone to also walk you through that new journey of who you are. You're a different person now. You're not that same person anymore. So not only getting checked in on mentally, but also getting your hormones looked at, also getting your full health kind of assessed in this new chapter of your life and your body. Your body went through a lot. Your nutrient stores were taken from you made milk, whether you breastfed or not, you still made it, and it was there for a little bit of time. And so your body is different. There's a lot of things we can check in on, and give yourself a little bit of grace.
Yeah, can I add on to that? I think this is such a really interesting question. My book is about joyful aging, and so it sort of just gives a glancing blow to like sort of menstrual health and that kind of thing. But one of the things that I think that was really sort of eye-opening for me was this idea of constantly chasing, like what you said, pre-pregnancy, sort of constantly chasing this idea of youth. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that helps all of us is understanding from the time that we're a zygote, right? Our bodies continue to change, and they do that through our entire lives. And it's so interesting to me how at some point in our lives, we become sort of fixated that, oh, I want my 25-year-old body, or I want my 20-year-old body. But we don't do this, like 20-year-olds don't go, I wish I had my 5-year-old body, right? Or, like like we sort of know that our bodies are supposed to change over time, but that if for some reason we decide that, oh, and now it has to freeze in time for the rest of time. And really sort of coming to terms with the fact that every single second of the day, there are all kinds of metabolic things that are happening that are changing, right? Like aging is living, living is aging. And of course, like Dr. Bala says, you know, your pregnancy is a moment in time that's going to change your body, and sort of understanding like what that change is, what sort of evolutionary that may mean. One of the things for me that was really interesting is, you know, a lot of people sort of in perimenopause and menopause, they get to the point where they're like, I can't lose weight. I can't lose weight. And there's this theory, it's not fact, so don't like quote me on this, but there is this theory that says that the reason that you don't lose weight is actually evolutionary, because when you get to your 80s and 90s, it can be difficult to keep on weight. And it's sort of your body sort of getting ready for that time in your 80s and 90s. That was something that came up. So sort of really, and for me, that gave me a whole lot of grace, right? I was like, oh, well, if this is evolutionary, what my body's supposed to be doing, I can stop punishing myself because I haven't achieved that. And sort of understanding that this evolution of your body is sort of the natural course of what's supposed to happen, and looking at it as what can it give you going forward as opposed to what you're leaving behind, I think can be a really, really big help. Sorry, I bet that's a big soapbox for me on that, but it is something that really, really sort of came up with that. Okay. I think we're sort of running out of time.
We had one more quick
we have one
thing.
more? All right, let's get one more in.
Just
yeah,
really
please.
quick, someone had asked how to get in touch with both of you, and so we put your links in the chat, but I also wanted to mention, very exciting, that Radiant Rebellion, your book, is coming out in just a week. So they had asked where they can get it. We do have a link in the chat, but just, you know, if you wanted to chat a little bit about that coming out and where people can find it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. That's very, very kind. Yes, you can get Radiant Rebellion anywhere your books are sold. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes and Noble and all the big sellers. But I do love an independent bookseller, so please call your local bookseller as well to see if you get it. But yes, people are already receiving it, but it's out officially on the 17th. And so
wonderful.
Okay, so thank you guys so much. I want to invite Sarah Plotkin, if she's there, to come back on. Dr. Bala, you are amazing. Thank you so much. Like I said, I don't know where you've been all my life. I learned so much from you. And thanks to everybody for being so engaged and asking their questions. And this has been so wonderful and really sort of a joy. So Sarah, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Dr. Bala. Really enjoyed the discussion. And thank you to everyone who asked questions. I hope that we can all take this conversation back to our online communities, our friends, our families, our colleagues. Just a reminder that anything that we do to normalize menstruation, perimenopause, postpartum, it helps the greater good. And that's why conversations like this are so important. So we really appreciate you all taking the time to join us. I'm also proud to share that Thinx, in a commitment to really continuing this conversation, is going to be sharing the state of the period findings more widely over the next couple of days. And we would really love to call on all of you to help us spread the word about what we learned from this year's survey. So we are launching a social pledge on Instagram. We are donating $1 to Period, the nonprofit, every time someone reshares the results on Instagram. So if you head over to the Thinx Instagram account, you'll see that we've shared some of the stats from this year's survey. And if you reshare those to your Instagram story using the hashtag State of the Period, we'll donate $1 to Period for every post. As a reminder, Period is a nonprofit that's working across the country to provide access to period products for those who need it, really in an effort to end period poverty. So we, of course, want to support their mission, and we'd love if all of you could help us do that. So like I said, head on over to Thinx's Instagram and you'll find the assets there. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully we can continue to host conversations like this in the future with great partners like Dr. Bala and Karen. Thank you all so much. Take care.